In Owerri, a busy city filled with noise and life, lived Amaka, a young nurse with dreams bigger than her struggles. Every day she wore her white uniform and went to the hospital, working long hours that often stretched into the night. While others rested, she moved from bed to bed, comforting patients and saving lives. Many times she went home tired, hungry, and with aching feet, but she never complained. She had one goal in her heart: to build a home she could call her own. Amaka was not rich. Her salary was small, but she was careful with every coin. She refused to waste money on flashy clothes or parties like others her age. Instead, she saved quietly, telling herself, "One day, I will live in a house that is mine." For years, she denied herself pleasures, worked double shifts, and endured sleepless nights just to add a little more to her savings. Finally, her dream began to rise from the ground. Brick by brick, her house took shape. She watched it grow with tears in her eyes, knowing every wall carried her pain and sacrifice. When the building was completed, it stood tall and beautiful, a symbol of her strength. Neighbors admired her, saying, "Look at what she has done. A woman who built alone." But inside her own family, there was no celebration. Instead of pride, they looked at her with envy. And though she smiled at her house, Amaka could already feel the shadows of jealousy rising around her. In Amaka's family, love was never balanced. From childhood, her parents adored her younger sister, Chidinma. Where Amaka was serious and hardworking, Chidinma was playful, charming, and carefree. She never held a job for long, never saved a kobo, and yet everyone excused her recklessness, saying, "She is young, she will change." Amaka often carried the family's responsibilities, buying food, paying bills, even sending money home from her hospital shifts. Still, her sacrifices went unnoticed. When Amaka's house was finally completed, the family visited. They walked through the wide halls, touched the polished tiles, and stood under the roof she had struggled for years to build. Instead of joy, envy filled their eyes. They whispered among themselves, "How can Amaka, a woman, own the biggest house in this family? What man will even marry her now that she has too much pride? A house like this should belong to Chidinma." Her mother, who always favored the younger daughter, agreed quickly. She saw the house not as Amaka's reward, but as a gift that should be used to secure Chidinma's marriage. "Chidinma is the face of this family," she said softly one evening. "If we give her this house, her suitors will come quickly. Amaka is too strict and old. What will she do with such a big house?" Soon the whispers turned into secret meetings. Relatives gathered, plotting a plan Amaka would never imagine. They decided to present the house as a family gift to Chidinma when she got married. They reasoned that Amaka had no husband and no children, so she had no real claim. "A woman's success means nothing if she has no man to share it with," one uncle muttered, and the others nodded in agreement. Chidinma, spoiled and careless, smiled as she listened. She never worked a single day toward the house, yet she already imagined herself living inside it, hosting guests, and being praised as the most fortunate daughter. She never once stopped to think about Amaka's pain or sacrifice. While they schemed, Amaka continued working double shifts at the hospital, unaware of the betrayal forming in her own bloodline. She still carried her family in her heart, believing they would be proud of her. Many nights she sat in her new house, imagining family gatherings filled with laughter. But behind closed doors, those very people were sharpening their knives of envy. The plan was set. They would wait for the right moment, when Chidinma's marriage was close, to announce their decision. And in their hearts, they convinced themselves it was the right thing, that Amaka had built for the family, not for herself. What they didn't know was that the seeds of betrayal they were planting would one day return to haunt them. For the house they were eager to snatch would not bring them peace, it would bring a storm that none of them could escape. Amaka dragged her tired feet along the dusty road, her hospital shift heavier than usual that day. Her back ached, her eyes burned from lack of sleep, and her stomach rumbled, but she comforted herself with one thought: soon she would rest in her own house, the home she had built with her sweat and sacrifice. As she got closer, strange sounds filled the air, laughter, music, and clapping. She stopped for a moment, confused. Why was her house filled with noise? For a second, she even thought maybe her family had planned a surprise for her. She smiled faintly, but that smile died the moment she opened the door. Her living room was crowded. Relatives, neighbors, and friends were eating, drinking, and celebrating. The chairs she had saved to buy, the curtains she had chosen with care, the very walls she had prayed over. Everything was now decorated for a party she knew nothing about. At the center of the room, her younger sister Chidinma sat dressed like a bride, beaming as if she were the queen of the house. Before Amaka could process anything, her father stood up proudly, lifted his hand and announced, "Today we celebrate our daughter Chidinma. This house will now be her marital home. From this day we gift it to her." Cheers and claps filled the air, but inside Amaka the world shattered. She froze by the doorway, still in her wrinkled nurse's uniform, clutching her old bag like it was the only piece of herself left. Her heart pounded in her ears. The house she had built with sleepless nights, the house she had dreamed of resting in after endless shifts, had just been taken from her, handed away without her consent. Her eyes searched the room, desperate for one face to defend her, one person to say this was wrong. But her mother avoided her gaze, her uncles nodded in agreement, her cousins laughed, and Chidinma smiled proudly, enjoying every moment. Not a single soul spoke for her. Amaka's throat tightened, but no words came out. The betrayal was too sharp, too deep. It was not just the loss of a house, it was the loss of trust, of family, of belonging. They had taken her years of sacrifice and turned them into a gift for someone who had never lifted a finger. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them back. She refused to break in front of them. She stood there silently, her heart screaming even though her lips could not. And in that silence, she felt something inside her shift. A vow, born from pain, burned in her chest. They could take the house, but they could never take her strength. One day, they would see what they had thrown away. The celebration that was supposed to honor Chidinma soon turned into a trial against Amaka. As she stood quietly in her own house, still in her nurse's uniform, whispers started to spread through the room. Some relatives did not bother to whisper at all. One aunt, with a smirk on her face, said loudly, "Amaka is already too old. What use does she have for a house like this? She should be thinking of who will even marry her." The words cut through Amaka like a knife. Another uncle added, shaking his head, "She is too strict, too serious. No man wants a woman who behaves like a soldier. What joy would she bring into a home? At least Chidinma is soft, beautiful, and lively. She deserves this house." The guests, who should have respected her, instead joined in the mockery. Laughter filled the room, sharp and cruel. Some clapped as if agreeing, while others whispered insults. "A woman without joy, a woman with no charm. She works like a man but remains alone." Each word was like a stone thrown at her heart. Amaka stood still, her hands clutching her bag tighter and tighter. Her chest burned, her throat ached, and though her eyes brimmed with tears, she refused to let them see her cry openly. She lowered her head slightly, and the tears slid down silently, hidden from their mocking eyes. In that moment, she felt stripped of her dignity. Her years of sacrifice, her hard work, the sleepless nights, none of it mattered to them. All they saw was a woman who did not fit their idea of worthy. Her sister Chidinma sat proudly, enjoying the attention. She did not once defend Amaka. Instead, she laughed softly when people praised her beauty and mocked her elder sister's strictness. Even their mother joined in, saying, "It is better this way. Chidinma will make this house alive. Amaka, you are too serious, too dry." Those words broke something inside her. From her own mother, the one she had trusted, came a betrayal deeper than any wound. Amaka wanted to scream, to shout that it was her sweat that built those walls, her pain that laid every brick, her sacrifice that gave them a roof. But the words refused to leave her lips. Her silence became her shield, and in that silence she made a vow. She would not be broken by their cruelty. She would not let their laughter define her. If they thought she was too strict, too serious, too unworthy, then she would show them that her worth was far greater than their shallow eyes could see. As the party went on around her, Amaka stood like a rock in the storm. She wept silently inside, but her heart whispered with fire, "You will regret this day. One day, The same woman you call unworthy will rise higher than all of you." That night, after everyone had gone and the laughter in her stolen house had faded, Amaka sat alone in her small room. She looked at the walls she had built with her sweat, and for the first time they felt like prison walls. Every corner of the house reminded her of betrayal: her father's proud announcement, her mother's cold words, her relatives' mocking laughter, and Chidinma's smiling face. She realized she could not breathe in a place where her own blood had buried her dignity. Quietly, without telling anyone, Amaka took out an old suitcase. She folded her few clothes carefully, packed her nursing certificates, and placed her worn shoes inside. Each item she picked reminded her of sacrifice: shoes she had walked in for years, uniforms she had worked endless shifts in, and a bag that had carried her dreams. Now, all she could carry was herself. She stood for a long moment, looking at the house one last time. No words came, only silent tears. Then she whispered to herself, "I will not beg. If they have chosen to throw me out, let me walk away with my pride." Before dawn, Amaka slipped out quietly. No one saw her leave, no one asked where she was going. She carried only her bag and her wounded heart, but inside that heart something had changed. The warmth of family had died, replaced with a fire of determination. Betrayal had hardened her, but it had not destroyed her. She arrived in Port Harcourt, a city full of strangers, noise, and opportunity. At first, it was not easy. She rented a tiny one-room apartment with barely enough space for a bed. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, dressed in her old uniform, and worked double shifts at the hospital. Patients only saw a kind nurse with gentle hands, but no one knew the storm inside her. She poured her pain into her work, turning her heartbreak into strength. Unlike before, Amaka no longer thought only of surviving. She began to plan. With each paycheck she saved, she stopped buying even the smallest luxuries. Instead of gold earrings or new clothes, she bought land, small plots at first, in places no one cared about. People laughed at her, saying, "What will a woman like you do with land?" But she ignored them. She had learned her lesson: never put your future in anyone's hands but your own. Months turned into years. One plot became 2, then 3. Slowly she started building again, but this time in silence, without telling anyone, not even her family. What they had stolen from her had planted a seed, and that seed was now growing into something greater. Far away in Port Harcourt, Amaka was no longer the woman they mocked as too old or too strict. She was becoming something stronger, something untouchable. And though her family knew nothing, the day would come when they would face the power of the woman they had once thrown away. Years passed like the turning of seasons, and time began to reveal what was hidden. In Owerri, Chidinma's once celebrated marriage was falling apart. The grand wedding that had filled the family with pride had turned into a memory stained by debts and fights. Her husband, once full of promises, grew tired of her reckless spending and constant demands. He shouted at her for wasting money on parties, clothes, and friends. Bills piled up, creditors knocked at the door, and slowly the shine of her marriage faded. The beautiful house Amaka had built, the one they had snatched away, became a place of quarrels and tears. Meanwhile, far away in Port Harcourt, Amaka's story was different. Quietly and steadily, she had transformed her pain into power. The land she bought years ago had increased in value, and she began building small houses for rent. Soon, those small houses brought her steady income, and she bought more land. Her name started to spread in the city, not as the woman mocked by her family, but as a wise and hard-working nurse who was now also a landlord. Her savings grew, and with courage, she opened a small private clinic. Patients who knew her from the hospital trusted her, and word spread about her kindness and skill. Mothers brought their children to her, workers came to her for care, and even the poor found help at her clinic. Respect followed her wherever she went. For the first time in her life, she felt not just hardworking but truly valued. Years of patience and discipline bore fruit. Amaka, the same woman who once carried an old uniform bag and left her home in tears, now owned multiple properties across the city. She walked into her clinic in elegant clothes, driving a car she had bought with her own money, her head held high. People greeted her with admiration, calling her Madam Nurse. landlady, and doctor of hearts. And then came the day she built again, not just a house but a mansion, bigger, brighter, and more beautiful than the one that had been stolen from her. This time, every brick was stronger, every wall higher, every room filled with dignity that no one could take away. Standing before the mansion, she felt no bitterness, only a deep sense of triumph. The tears she once shed in silence had now watered her future. Back in Owerri, her family whispered about their troubles. Chidinma's husband had left, debts were swallowing them, and the house was crumbling. Yet in Port Harcourt, Amaka was rising, higher than they could ever imagine. She had once been called too strict, too old, too joyless. Now, she was a woman of wealth, respect, and influence. The house they stole had rotted, but the house she built with dignity and wisdom would stand as her crown forever. In Owerri, the story that once looked like glory soon turned into shame. Chidinma's marriage, which had been celebrated with dancing and music, collapsed like a house built on sand. Her husband, tired of endless debts and her careless spending, finally walked away. One morning, he left without a word, leaving behind only unpaid bills and broken promises. Neighbors who once admired their union now shook their heads and whispered, "Beauty cannot hold a home. Pride cannot feed a family." The house that once echoed with celebration slowly became silent. The paint began to fade, the roof leaked when it rained, and weeds grew around the compound. Without money for repairs, the once proud home turned into a shadow of itself. What had been called Chidinma's palace became a place people avoided, a symbol of wasted opportunity. Inside, things were worse. Relatives who had once cheered when the house was gifted to Chidinma now turned against one another. Arguments broke out about who truly owned the property. Some claimed it was family land, others said it should be sold, while a few even tried to move in without permission. What was meant to unite them became a seed of endless quarrels. Brothers stopped speaking to brothers, cousins insulted each other, and the family name that once held respect in Owerri was now mocked in the marketplace. Poverty, like an unwelcome guest, crept back into their lives. Meals became smaller, bills went unpaid, and many of them secretly regretted wasting the daughter who had once carried them. The same lips that mocked Amaka now began to whisper her name again, but this time with sorrow. "If only we had stood by her," some said. "If only we had honored her sacrifices, maybe our story would be different." Even Chidinma, once proud and confident, now sat broken. Her beauty had faded under the weight of stress, and her eyes carried the emptiness of regret. She remembered the day she sat in Amaka's chair, smiling as people praised her. Now, the same chair sat empty in a crumbling house, and no one looked at her with admiration anymore. Their mother, who once said Amaka was too strict and too joyless, cried in secret. She looked at her scattered family and whispered prayers into the night. Deep inside, she knew the truth. The daughter they had humiliated was the only one who could have lifted them. In the streets of Owerri, neighbors gossiped openly. "That house brought them nothing but shame," they said. "They betrayed the wrong daughter." And as those words spread, the family lowered their heads in silence. It was clear now, the betrayal that once felt like victory had turned into their curse. And in their hearts, they all wondered the same thing. Where was Amaka, the woman they had cast aside? Would she ever forgive them, or had they lost her forever? The news spread through Owerri like wildfire. There was going to be a big community event in the town square, and important guests from Port Harcourt were coming. Nobody paid much attention at first, until the day arrived. That morning, the sound of car horns filled the air. A long convoy of shiny black cars rolled into the town, moving slowly, drawing curious eyes. Children ran after the vehicles, neighbors peered from their windows, and whispers filled the street. Then the door of the lead car opened, and out stepped Amaka. She was dressed in an elegant gown, her head held high, her smile calm but commanding. No longer the tired nurse carrying an old uniform bag, she now looked like a queen. Her jewelry sparkled in the sunlight, her driver held the door for her, and respected men and women from Port Harcourt walked by her side. The forgotten daughter had returned, not with tears but with power. The entire town went silent for a moment, then gasps spread through the crowd. "Is that Amaka?" people whispered. The same woman they mocked. Neighbors who once pitied her now rushed forward, bowing, greeting her, stretching their hands to shake hers. Market women left their stalls to come and see. The girl who had walked away in silence had returned brighter than anyone could imagine. Her family stood at a distance, frozen. Her father's proud voice that once declared the house belonged to Chidinma was now silent. Her mother's eyes, once filled with criticism, now filled with shame. Chidinma, who had once sat proudly in Amaka's chair, now hid behind the crowd, unable to face her. The relatives who laughed at her and called her a woman without joy, now lowered their heads, afraid to meet her eyes. As Amaka walked through the square, the people of Owerri surrounded her with honor. Chiefs greeted her warmly, women ululated in joy, and children pointed at her with admiration. She did not walk with anger, she walked with grace. Her steps carried no bitterness, only quiet dignity. She had no need to remind anyone of what they had done. Her presence alone was the answer. She was invited to sit at the front of the gathering, her seat decorated like that of royalty. Her name was announced with respect, and the crowd cheered. Every clap, every cheer, was like a knife in the hearts of those who had once mocked her. Her family watched as neighbors who once laughed at Amaka now praised her as a blessing to the town. They saw what they had thrown away, and shame burned deeply in their hearts. Amaka did not look at them with hate. She only smiled calmly as if to say, "You thought you buried me, but I was only a seed." That day, the forgotten daughter of Owerri became the pride of the entire community, and her family, once blinded by envy, could only watch from the shadows as she shone brighter than anyone else. The community square in Owerri was filled with excitement. Drums beat in the background, women sang songs of praise, and elders sat proudly in their traditional attire. Everyone had gathered for the commissioning of a brand new hospital, a project that would change the lives of countless people in the town. The air was filled with joy, but no one expected the moment that was about to come. The chief of Owerri rose to speak. His voice carried power, and the crowd fell silent at once. He looked around with a smile, then lifted his hand toward Amaka, who sat gracefully in the front row, dressed in a rich lace gown, her headscarf tied elegantly. The chief's words echoed, "My people, today is a day of history. This hospital you see before you was built through the generosity of one woman, our very own daughter Amaka." The crowd gasped in shock, then erupted in thunderous applause. Some people stood on their feet, clapping and cheering. Market women lifted their hands to the sky, shouting blessings. Children sang her name with excitement. Amaka, the woman once mocked and rejected, had quietly given the community a gift they could never forget. The chief's voice grew louder. This is the same woman her own family betrayed, the same woman they mocked and abandoned. But instead of bitterness, she gave back love. While her family turned against her, she chose to uplift the entire community. This hospital is her gift to us all. Gasps rippled through the crowd again. Heads turned toward her family, who sat in the middle of the gathering, their faces burning with shame. Her father stared at the ground, unable to look up. Her mother wiped tears from her eyes, realizing how badly they had wronged their own daughter. Chidinma's face was pale, her pride crushed, as the community that once praised her now lifted Amaka high. The whispers grew louder. So it was Amaka who built this? The same daughter they called unworthy. She is the true blessing of this family. Every word from the crowd pierced her relatives' hearts like a knife. The same voices that once laughed at Amaka now condemned the family that had betrayed her. They had thought they stole her future, but she had built an empire far greater than they imagined. Amaka sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap, her smile calm and humble. She did not boast, nor did she throw insults. Her dignity alone spoke louder than any words. She had transformed her pain into power, her rejection into respect. When the ribbon was cut, the entire town erupted in celebration. Songs of her name filled the air. Women danced around her, and children clung to her gown with admiration. But behind the laughter and joy, her family sat broken, finally realizing the true worth of the daughter they had discarded. That day, Owerri crowned Amaka not just as a successful woman, but as a savior of her people, and her family was left to carry the heavy weight of regret. When the truth finally became too heavy, Amaka's family came to her door. Their faces were tired, their clothes worn, their pride gone. They fell to their knees, begging her to forgive them. "Amaka, we were blind," her mother whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Please take us back. We are sorry." Her father, once proud and commanding, now looked like a broken man. Even Chidinma, the sister who had once mocked her, could not raise her head. Amaka stood tall, her presence commanding respect without a word. She looked at them with calm eyes, not anger but strength. Then she spoke softly, yet her words cut deeper than any shout. "The house you stole rotted. The house I built with my dignity will stand for generations. I will not let bitterness destroy me, but I will never forget what was done." Her family wept harder, realizing their betrayal could never be erased. Yet, with grace, Amaka instructed her staff to give them food, clothing, and shelter. She provided for their basic needs, not because they deserved it, but because her heart had grown beyond their cruelty. She had become more than their daughter. She had become a pillar of her community. The people of Owerri gathered to celebrate her once more. They called her the woman of resilience, the daughter who turned pain into power. Drums beat, songs were sung, and her name was praised across the land. But while Amaka stood crowned in dignity, her family carried the weight of regret. For the rest of their lives, they lived in the shadow of the woman they once cast aside, the woman who proved that true strength is not in what is taken, but in what is built.